It was one of those nights where the city felt alive in a way that only big cities can. The rooftop lounge sat high above the bustling streets, glowing with neon lights and filled with the hum of expensive conversations. People dressed to impress, designer, suits, sparkling jewelry, and shoes so shiny they could reflect the skyline. This place wasn't just a club. It was a symbol of success, a spot where only the elite dared to walk in. Among the crowd stood a young man who thought he owned the room. He walked with a swagger, his expensive watch catching the light every time he moved his wrist. His name wasn't important here, but his last name carried weight. He was the son of a billionaire CEO, someone whose family name opened doors before he even knocked. But tonight none of that seemed to matter. The bouncer at the VIP section gave him a nod as he entered, recognizing the face but not bothering to smile. Inside, the air smelled like champagne and confidence. Music thumped in the background, loud enough to feel but soft enough to let people talk business or spill secrets. Our guy, let's call him the spoiled rich kid, settled into a corner, Booth ordering drinks like he was trying to empty the bar's stock. For a while, everything went smoothly. He laughed too loudly at jokes no one told, made small talk with strangers who clearly didn't care, and generally acted like he belonged there, which, technically, he did. But then came the moment that changed everything. A waitress approached the table with another round of drinks, her tray balanced carefully in one hand. She navigated through the crowded space with practiced ease, but when she reached the booth, disaster struck. Someone bumped into her from behind, sending a glass tumbling onto the lap of the spoiled rich kid. Champagne soaked his fancy pants, and for a second the whole area went quiet. His face turned red, not just from embarrassment but from anger. "What is wrong with you?" he snapped, glaring at the waitress. She stammered an apology, her hands shaking as she tried to clean up the mess. But it wasn't enough. He stood up, towering over her, and started yelling louder. The other guests looked away, pretending not to notice, but the damage was done. Security arrived quickly, 2 burly men in sharp uniforms who asked him to step outside. At first he refused, arguing that he had every right to be there. But when he realized no one was taking his side, not the staff, not the other VIPs, he stormed out, muttering threats under his breath. As he pushed past the velvet ropes and back into the cold night air, he swore revenge on everyone who'd witnessed his humiliation. Standing alone on the sidewalk, he clenched his fists and stared back at the glowing sign of the lounge. He wasn't just mad. He was boiling with rage. How dare they treat him like that? Didn't they know who his father was? Didn't they understand what kind of power he had access to? That's when an idea popped into his head, an idea fueled by pride and privilege. Pulling out his phone, he scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he needed. With trembling fingers, he pressed dial. On the other end, a familiar voice answered, groggy from being woken up in the middle of the night. "Dad," he said, cutting straight to the point. "We need to talk." And just like that, the wheels of chaos began to turn. Little did anyone know this single phone call would change lives forever. Not just his own, but the lives of dozens of innocent people caught in the crossfire of ego and entitlement. The phone rang twice before it was answered. On the other end, a tired but familiar voice mumbled, "Do you have any idea what time it is?" It was clear the call had interrupted something, maybe sleep, maybe work, but the spoiled rich kid didn't care. This wasn't a conversation he wanted to delay. His blood was still boiling from the night's events, and every second that passed felt like another slap in the face. "Dad," he began, his tone sharp and urgent. "We need to fix this. Now." There was a pause on the other end. The father sighed deeply, already sensing trouble. He knew his son well enough to recognize when there was drama brewing. Still half asleep, he asked, "What happened now? Another speeding ticket? Did you crash another car?" "No," the son shot back, his voice rising with frustration. "This is serious. They kicked me out of the VIP section at that club downtown, humiliated me in front of everyone. You know, the one your company partners with for events. I'm not letting this slide." The father sat up in bed, suddenly more alert. He rubbed his temples, trying to process what he was hearing. This wasn't the first time his son had called him late at night with some kind of complaint. But this felt different. There was an edge to his voice, a mix of anger and desperation that made him uneasy. "Hold on," the father said, keeping his tone calm despite the tension building inside him. "Are you telling me you got thrown out of a club because of what? Bad behavior?" "It wasn't bad behavior," the son snapped. "I spilled a drink. Okay, fine. Someone spilled a drink on me, and I said something about it, but they treated me like I was nobody. Like I didn't matter. Do you know how that feels?" The father sighed again, heavier this time. He did know how it felt. In fact, he'd spent years teaching his son that their family name carried weight, that it could open doors others couldn't even see. But somewhere along the way, things had gone wrong. Instead of learning respect or humility, his son had developed a sense of entitlement that bordered on arrogance. And now, here they were. "Listen," the father said firmly, cutting off his son's rant. "I get it, you're upset, but you can't just call me every time life doesn't go your way. People make mistakes, you make mistakes, that's part of growing up." But the son wasn't ready to listen. Not tonight. His pride was wounded, and all he could think about was making the people who embarrassed him pay for it. "No, Dad. You don't get it," he shot back. "They disrespected me. Disrespected us. Everyone knows we're connected to that place through your business deals. If word gets out that they treated me like garbage, what does that say about our family? About you?" That hit a nerve. The father froze, his mind racing. His son had always been good at finding ways to manipulate him, whether by guilt-tripping him or threatening to expose skeletons in the closet. And this time was no different. Deep down, the father knew his son was exaggerating, blowing things out of proportion to get what he wanted. But the threat lingered. If he didn't act, there was a chance his son would do something reckless, something that could harm the family's reputation. "Okay," the father said finally, his voice quieter now. "Tell me exactly what happened. Who was involved? What do you want me to do?" The son smirked. The son didn't waste a second. He launched into a detailed account of the night, painting himself as the victim and everyone else as the villain. "It was the staff, Dad. The bouncers, the manager, even the waitress, they all ganged up on me. They made me look like some kind of troublemaker in front of everyone. Everyone saw it. It's embarrassing." He paused for effect, letting his words sink in. Then he added, almost casually but with a hint of menace, "You know how these things spread. By tomorrow morning this will be all over social media. People will talk. They'll say your own son got kicked out of a place you do business with. What does that say about us, about K-Tech?" The father clenched his jaw, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He knew his son had a point, not because the incident itself mattered, but because perception often carried more power than reality. In their world, appearances were everything. A scandal, no matter how small, could spiral out of control if left unchecked. And while the father prided himself on being level-headed, he also understood the delicate balance of maintaining both his company's image and his family's reputation. "All right," the father said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "I'll handle it. But you need to stay out of this from now on. Let me take care of it." The son smirked, satisfied. He'd won, or so he thought. Hanging up the phone, he leaned back against the cold brick wall outside the club, feeling a twisted sense of victory. For once, he felt like he was in control, like the universe owed him something. Little did he realize the chain reaction he had just set into motion. Meanwhile, the father sat at his desk, staring at the glowing screen of his laptop. Sleep was out of the question now. He opened his email and typed a quick message to one of his top executives, asking for an emergency meeting first thing in the morning. Then he dialed another number, a private line reserved only for high-stakes conversations. On the other end, the owner of the lounge picked up, sounding groggy but immediately alert when he heard who was calling. "We need to talk," the father said without preamble. His tone was calm but firm, leaving no room for argument. "About what happened tonight?" The lounge owner hesitated, caught off guard. "What happened tonight?" he repeated, feigning ignorance. But deep down he already knew where this was going. News traveled fast in their circles, especially when it involved someone like the spoiled rich kid. "My son," the father continued, cutting straight to the chase. "He says your staff treated him poorly, that they embarrassed him in front of guests. Is there any truth to that?" There was a long pause on the other end. The lounge owner shifted uncomfortably in his chair, weighing his options. Denying the claim outright would only escalate things, but admitting fault might cost him dearly. Finally, he settled on a middle ground. "Look, I haven't gotten the full story yet, but if there's an issue, we'll address it. You know, we value our partnership with K-Tech." "That's good to hear," the father replied, his voice colder now. "Because here's the thing. I expect action. Whoever was involved in this, whether it's the bouncers, the manager, or anyone else, they need to go. By tomorrow morning. Otherwise, consider our partnership terminated." The lounge owner's stomach dropped. He opened his mouth to protest, but quickly realized it was pointless. Arguing with someone like the father was like trying to stop a storm with bare hands. It wasn't going to work. Instead, he swallowed hard and nodded, even though the father couldn't see him. "Understood," he said quietly. "I'll make sure it's handled." The next day, chaos erupted at the lounge. The owner called an impromptu meeting with his team, his face pale and drawn. When everyone gathered, he delivered the news with visible reluctance. "Effective immediately, anyone involved in last night's incident is fired," he announced, his voice heavy with regret. "That includes the bouncers, the manager overseeing the VIP section, and the waitress who served the table. Pack your things and leave the premises." The room fell silent, shock rippling through the group like a wave. No one spoke. No one moved. These weren't just employees, they were people with families, bills to pay, dreams to chase. For many of them, this job wasn't just a paycheck, it was their livelihood. One of the bouncers stepped forward, his fists clenched but his voice steady. "We were just doing our jobs," he said, his frustration barely contained. "Your rules are clear. If someone causes a scene, we remove them. That's what we did. Are you really firing us for following protocol?" The owner looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "This isn't personal, it's business." But the apology rang hollow. Everyone in the room knew the truth. This wasn't about fairness or justice. It was about power and how easily it could crush ordinary people beneath its weight. As the fired employees gathered their belongings and walked out, the mood was somber, tinged with anger and disbelief. None of them had asked for this. None of them deserved it. Yet here they were, victims of a game they hadn't even known they were playing. And somewhere far away, the spoiled rich kid remained oblivious to the lives he had just turned upside down. The lounge was eerily quiet the next morning. Normally, this time of day would be filled with the sounds of preparation, chairs being wiped down, glasses clinking as they were stacked behind the bar, soft chatter among the staff as everyone got ready for another night of glitz and glamour. But today there was none of that. The atmosphere felt heavy, like a storm cloud hanging low over the room. Word had spread quickly about what happened. The bouncers, the manager, even the waitress. All of them were gone, just like that. Some of the remaining employees tried to act normal, going through the motions of setting up, but it was clear their hearts weren't in it. Every corner of the place seemed to carry whispers of anger, confusion, and sadness. One of the bartenders, a middle-aged woman who had been working at the lounge for years, sat alone at the far end of the bar. Her apron lay crumpled beside her, unused. She stared blankly at the rows of bottles lining the shelves, her mind replaying the events of the past 24 hours. She hadn't been directly involved in the incident, but she knew the people who were. And now, they were out of a job because of something that didn't even seem fair. Her thoughts drifted to the waitress, a young girl barely in her 20s who worked tirelessly to support her family. Everyone liked her. She was kind, hard-working, and always willing to lend a hand. Losing this job wasn't just inconvenient for her, it was catastrophic. How would she pay rent? What about her little brother's school fees? These questions swirled in the bartender's mind, making her chest tighten with frustration. She wasn't the only one feeling this way. Across the room, Two servers huddled together near the kitchen entrance, speaking in hushed tones. One of them shook his head bitterly. "It's not right," he muttered. "They didn't do anything wrong. They followed the rules. If someone starts trouble, you kick them out. That's how it works." The other server nodded, her eyes narrowing with resentment. "Yeah, but apparently those rules don't apply when it's someone with a fancy last name. You think the owner even cared about us before he made that call? Nah, we're disposable to him." Their conversation trailed off as the reality sank in deeper. None of them felt safe anymore. If the boss could fire his own team so easily, who was to say they wouldn't be next? Loyalty meant nothing here. Hard work meant nothing. All that mattered was keeping the powerful happy, even if it came at the expense of everyone else. Outside the lounge, life went on as usual. Cars honked in the distance, pedestrians hurried past, and the city buzzed with its usual rhythm. But inside, the weight of injustice lingered like a shadow. The fired employees gathered in small groups outside the building, exchanging hugs, sharing stories, and trying to figure out what came next. One of the bouncers, a tall, broad-shouldered man with tattoos covering both arms, paced back and forth, running his hands through his hair. He had bills piling up, a car payment due next week, and no backup plan. Being let go without warning left him reeling, unsure of where to turn. "I've got a kid starting college soon," he said to no one in particular, his voice thick with emotion. How am I supposed to explain this to him? Nearby, the former VIP manager leaned against the wall, scrolling through job listings on his phone. His face was calm, but his jaw was clenched tight. He had spent years building a career in hospitality, climbing the ladder until he reached a position of responsibility. Now all of that effort felt meaningless. It wasn't just the loss of income that stung. It was the betrayal. He had given everything to this place, and in return he'd been discarded like trash. And then there was the waitress. She stood apart from the group, clutching her bag tightly to her chest. Her eyes were red and swollen, evidence of sleepless nights and endless tears. For her, this wasn't just about losing a job, it was about losing hope. She had dreamed of becoming a nurse someday, but those dreams required money for tuition. Without this paycheck, she didn't know how she'd keep moving forward. As the group slowly dispersed, heading home or searching for answers, one thing became painfully clear. None of them deserved this. They were ordinary people caught in the crossfire of someone else's ego. Their lives had been disrupted not because of anything they did wrong. The days that followed were long and heavy for the fired employees. Each of them carried their own burden, trying to figure out how to pick up the pieces of their lives. The waitress spent hours scrolling through job listings online, applying to anything that seemed remotely promising. But every rejection email felt like another punch to the gut. Her savings were running low, and the thought of telling her younger brother that she couldn't afford his school supplies made her stomach churn. She wasn't alone in her struggles. The bouncer with the tattoos had started picking up odd jobs, moving, furniture, cleaning garages, anything physical that didn't require much skill. It paid next to nothing, but it was enough to keep food on the table for his son. Still, he couldn't shake the frustration gnawing at him. He'd worked hard to build a reputation as someone reliable, someone people could count on. Now all of that felt meaningless. Every time he looked at his kid, he wondered if he was failing him by not having a stable income. The former VIP manager, meanwhile, tried to stay positive. He updated his resume, reached out to old contacts, and even attended a networking event. But deep down, he knew the truth. Finding another job in hospitality wouldn't be easy. Word traveled fast in their industry, and being fired under such dramatic circumstances wasn't exactly something you could hide. Employers might see him as a liability, someone who caused trouble. The thought of starting over from scratch at his age was daunting, to say the least. While these individuals wrestled with their new realities, the spoiled rich kid's life seemed to carry on as usual. At first, he basked in what he saw as victory. He replayed the night in his mind, imagining how everyone at the lounge must have panicked after his father's call. He pictured the owner scrambling to clean up the mess, the staff panicking about their jobs, It gave him a twisted sense of satisfaction. For once, he felt powerful, like he'd finally proven himself. But as the days passed, something unexpected happened. Guilt began creeping in. It started small, almost unnoticeable. A fleeting pang of discomfort when he remembered the waitress apologizing profusely for the spilled drink. Then came the social media posts. One evening, while killing time on his phone, he stumbled across a thread discussing the firings. Someone had tagged the lounge, accusing the management of unfair treatment toward its workers. Comments poured in, many of them sympathetic to the fired employees. One post caught his attention more than the others. It was written by a single mother who used to work at the lounge. She described how losing her job had left her struggling to put food on the table for her kids. "I did nothing wrong," she wrote. "I followed the rules, treated guests with respect, and worked hard, every day. But none of that mattered because one entitled person decided to throw a tantrum." Reading those words hit him like a ton of bricks. Suddenly, faces flashed in his mind. The waitress trembling as she cleaned up the spill. The bouncers looking confused when they escorted him out. The manager calmly explaining the club's policies. None of them had deserved what happened. They weren't villains, they were just doing their jobs. And now, because of him, their lives were falling apart. For the first time, he realized the scope of his actions. This wasn't just about embarrassing the lounge staff or teaching them a lesson. Real people, people with families, dreams, and responsibilities, had been hurt. His chest tightened with shame. What had he done? That night he couldn't sleep. Images of the fired employees haunted him. He tossed and turned, his mind racing with thoughts of apology, redemption, and whether it was even possible to fix what he'd broken. By morning, he'd made up his mind. He needed to talk to his father, not to demand anything this time, but to take responsibility. When he arrived at his father's office, he found the older man sitting behind his desk, buried in paperwork. The father glanced up, surprised to see his son standing there without an appointment. "What brings you here?" he asked, setting his pen down. The spoiled rich kid hesitated, unsure where to begin. Finally, he blurted out, "Dad, I messed up. Big time." His father raised an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. "Go on." I didn't think about what would happen when I called you. I mean, I wanted to punish them for kicking me out, but I never stopped to consider the people who'd actually lose their jobs. It's my fault those employees got fired, not theirs." To his surprise, his father didn't explode with anger. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, studying his son carefully. "So what are you planning to do about it?" The question caught him off guard. I don't know yet, but I want to fix it. Somehow." His father nodded slowly, a flicker of pride crossing his face. "Good. Start by owning your mistakes, that's the first step." Encouraged by his father's response, the spoiled rich kid left the office with a newfound determination. He didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was moving in the right direction. Little did he know his journey toward redemption was only beginning, and it would test him in ways he couldn't imagine. The spoiled rich kid left his father's office with a strange mix of emotions swirling inside him. Guilt, fear, and a tiny spark of hope. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of his actions pressing down on him. It wasn't just about fixing what he'd broken. It was about proving to himself that he could be better than this. That he wasn't just some entitled brat who threw tantrums when things didn't go his way. His first step was simple but terrifying. Reaching out to the fired employees. He didn't know how they'd react or if they'd even agree to meet with him. After all, why would they want anything to do with the person who ruined their lives? Still, he knew he had to try. Sitting at his kitchen table, he scribbled down a list of names he remembered from the lounge staff, the waitress, the bouncers, the manager, and started making calls. The first few attempts were rough. One number went straight to voicemail. Another call ended abruptly when the person hung up after hearing his voice. But eventually he managed to get through to someone. The former VIP manager. At first, the man sounded guarded, his tone clipped and cold. "What do you want?" he asked bluntly. I wanted to apologize," the spoiled rich kid stammered, fumbling over his words. "I know I messed up. Big time. and I want to make it right." There was a long pause on the other end. Finally, the manager sighed. "Look, an apology doesn't pay my bills. But fine, let's meet. Maybe we can talk about what making it right actually means." They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe later that afternoon. The spoiled rich kid arrived early, nervously tapping his fingers against the table as he waited. When the manager walked in, he looked tired, dark circles under his eyes, shoulders slouched. But he carried himself with a quiet dignity that made the spoiled rich kid feel even smaller. After ordering coffee, they sat across from each other, in awkward silence for a moment. Then the manager spoke. "So, tell me, what's your plan?" The spoiled rich kid took a deep breath. "I don't have all the answers yet, but I promise I'll do whatever it takes to help everyone who lost their job because of me. Whether that means finding new positions for them, covering their expenses, until they're back on their feet, or something else, I'll figure it out." The manager studied him carefully, searching for any hint of insincerity. After a while, he nodded slowly. "All right, I believe you. But understand this. You're not just helping us. You're also showing people like your dad and the lounge owner that regular workers matter. We're not disposable." Those words hit home. The spoiled rich kid realized this wasn't just about undoing damage. It was about standing up for the little guy, something he'd never thought about before. Over the next few days, he reached out to the rest of the fired employees. Some were hesitant at first, but most agreed to hear him out once they realized he was serious. Together, they came up with a plan. With his father's financial backing and some reluctant support from the lounge owner, he set up a fund to cover their immediate needs: rent, groceries, medical bills, while they looked for new jobs. He also hired a recruitment agency to help place them in similar roles elsewhere, ensuring they wouldn't lose momentum in their careers. But he didn't stop there. Inspired by the stories he heard from the fired employees, he decided to take things further. He announced plans to create a foundation aimed at supporting workers affected by corporate decisions. "This isn't just about one mistake," he told reporters during a press conference. "It's about recognizing the value of hardworking people who keep businesses running. They deserve respect, fairness, and opportunities, not empty promises." The announcement drew mixed reactions. Some praised him for stepping up and taking responsibility. Others dismissed it as a publicity stunt, accusing him of trying to polish his image after causing so much harm. But none of that mattered to him anymore. What mattered was the look in the eyes of the fired employees when they thanked him for helping them rebuild their lives. One evening, as he sat alone in his apartment reflecting on everything that had happened, he realized something important. This experience had changed him. He wasn't the same arrogant, self-centered person who stormed out of the lounge that night. He still had a lot to learn, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he was on the right path. And somewhere, along the way, he'd earned something even more valuable than money or power. The press conference was set up in a modest hall, far from the glitz and glamour of the rooftop lounge where everything had started. For once, the spoiled rich kid didn't care about appearances. This wasn't about looking good or impressing anyone. It was about owning up to his mistakes and showing that he meant what he said. The room was packed with reporters, cameras flashing like strobe lights as he stepped onto the small stage. He stood there for a moment, adjusting the microphone and taking a deep breath. His palms were sweaty, and his heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his ears. He'd never been great at public speaking, but this time it wasn't about being polished or perfect. It was about honesty. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady but soft. "I'm here today because I made a huge mistake, a mistake that cost innocent people their jobs and livelihoods. And I want to apologize, not just to those individuals, but to everyone who believes in fairness and respect." He paused, letting the words sink in. The room was eerily quiet, except for the faint hum of camera shutters. Then he continued, his tone growing more confident as he spoke. "A few weeks ago, I got kicked out of a club. Instead of handling it like an adult, I let my ego take over. I called my father, demanding revenge on the staff who treated me the way I deserved to be treated. like someone breaking the rules. Because of that phone call, several employees lost their jobs. People who worked hard every day, followed the rules, and supported their families were punished for something they didn't do wrong. His voice cracked slightly as he added, "One of them was a single mother who struggled to feed her kids after losing her job. Another was a young waitress working toward her dream of becoming a nurse. These aren't faceless workers. They're real people with dreams, responsibilities, and lives outside of work. And I destroyed part of that without even thinking." He stopped again, lowering his gaze for a second before looking back up at the crowd. "So, here's what I'm doing to fix it. First, I've personally funded a program to help these employees find new jobs if they haven't already. That includes covering moving costs, training fees, or anything else they might need to get back on their feet. Second, I've launched a foundation aimed at supporting workers affected by corporate decisions, people who are often forgotten when big companies make choices based on profit rather than people." As he spoke, he noticed a few nods in the audience. Some reporters scribbled notes furiously, while others leaned forward, clearly intrigued. But what mattered most to him was the group of fired employees sitting in the front row. Their expressions ranged from cautious optimism to outright disbelief. He locked eyes with the waitress for a moment, and she gave him a slight nod, almost imperceptible, but enough to make his chest tighten with gratitude. "I know actions speak louder than words," he went on, his voice firm now. "And I promise you, this isn't just lip service. I'll be working closely with these individuals to ensure they have the resources and support they need. Beyond that, I'll use my platform to advocate for fair treatment of workers everywhere." This incident opened my eyes to how easily people can be trampled under the weight of privilege and power. I don't ever want to contribute to that again. When he finished speaking, the room erupted into murmurs. Reporters shouted questions at him, their voices overlapping. "Do you think money can really fix this? Are you doing this for PR reasons? How has your relationship with your father changed?" He answered each question patiently, refusing to shy away from the tougher ones. When asked about his father, he smiled faintly. "My dad taught me a lot about responsibility through this process, not always in the best ways, but enough for me to understand that fixing things takes more than just writing a check. We've had our differences, but we're learning to communicate better. He's helping me fund the foundation, but this is my initiative, my responsibility." By the end of the press conference, the atmosphere had shifted. While some skeptics remained, many left feeling cautiously hopeful. The fired employees lingered afterward, shaking hands with the spoiled rich kid and thanking him for his efforts. One of the bouncers clapped him on the shoulder, saying gruffly, "You've still got a long road ahead, but I appreciate the effort, just don't screw it up." In the weeks that followed, the foundation gained traction. Stories poured in, from workers across different industries, retail employees laid off without notice, factory workers replaced by machines, interns exploited for free labor. Each story fueled the spoiled rich kid's determination to keep going. He spent less time attending glamorous parties and more time meeting with advocacy groups, learning about workplace rights and policies. Slowly but surely, his life began to change. He moved out of his luxury penthouse and into a smaller apartment, choosing simplicity over excess. He volunteered at community centers, mentoring young people interested in entrepreneurship and teaching them the importance of ethics in business. For the first time, he felt like he was contributing something meaningful, not just to society but to himself. Even his relationship with his father improved. They started having real conversations instead of superficial ones, discussing everything, from family dynamics to the pressures of running a global company. Though their bond would never be perfect, it became stronger, built on mutual respect and understanding. As months turned into a year, the spoiled rich kid realized he no longer recognized the person he used to be. Sure, he still had moments of doubt and insecurity, but he was learning to channel those feelings into action rather than anger. He wasn't seeking forgiveness anymore. He was earning trust, one step at a time. Months had passed since the press conference, and life for everyone involved began to settle into a new rhythm. The spoiled rich kid, now often referred to as the guy who tried to make things right, had thrown himself fully into his foundation work. It wasn't easy. There were days when he felt overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the problems facing workers everywhere. But each small victory kept him going. A single mother landing a stable job, a young man getting an apprenticeship in tech, or even just hearing someone say, "Thank you." The fired employees from the lounge also started rebuilding their lives. The waitress enrolled in nursing school, using part of the financial support she received to cover her tuition. She still worked part-time at a diner to make ends meet, but every late-night study session brought her closer to her dream. Her younger brother often teased her about becoming Dr. Bigshot, but deep down, he was proud. So was she. The bouncers found jobs at another club, one that valued loyalty and treated its staff fairly. They joked that they'd finally escaped the glamour trap and landed somewhere with actual heart. Even the former VIP manager got back on his feet, taking up a role at a boutique hotel where his experience shone. Though none of them forgot what happened at the lounge, they chose to focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on the past. As for the lounge owner, he learned a hard lesson too. After severing ties with K-Tech temporarily, he realized how much damage corporate bullying could do, not just to employees, but to businesses themselves. Determined to avoid repeating history, he implemented new policies to protect his staff from unfair treatment. He also reached out to the fired employees personally, apologizing for letting them down and offering them their jobs back if they wanted them. Some returned, others declined, having found better opportunities elsewhere. Either way, it marked a turning point for the lounge, a shift toward valuing people over profit. Back at K-Tech, the father watched his son's transformation with quiet pride. For years, he'd worried about leaving behind a legacy. Would his company thrive without him? Would his family stay united after he was gone? Now, watching his son champion causes bigger than himself, he saw glimpses of hope. They weren't perfect. He doubted they ever would be. But they were growing together in ways neither of them expected. One evening, the two sat side by side, on the balcony of the father's penthouse apartment, sipping coffee as the city lights twinkled below. "You've come a long way," the father said finally, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "I'm proud of you," the son chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Don't get too mushy on me, Dad. I've still got a lot to learn." "True," the father replied with a grin, "but you're learning. That's what matters." They sat there for a while longer, talking about everything and nothing, the kind of conversation fathers and sons should have more often, but rarely do. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And sometimes, real is enough. Looking back, the spoiled rich kid couldn't believe how far he'd come. What started as a reckless act of entitlement had turned into a journey of self-discovery and redemption. He wasn't naive enough to think he'd fixed everything, or that one person could solve all the world's problems. But he knew this. Change begins with owning your mistakes and doing whatever it takes to make things right. He thought about the waitress chasing her dreams, the bouncers laughing over beers after a long shift, and the manager confidently leading his team at the hotel. Each of them carried a piece of this story, proving that even in the darkest moments, there's always room for light. And somewhere along the way, he discovered something unexpected: purpose.